My name is Vorth Kellen, and I've witnessed more duels than most beings have seen sunrises. As the official chronicler for the Galactic Combat League, I've recorded victories, defeats, and everything in between across 17 different star systems. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened when a human named Marcus Vale stepped into the arena against Thresh Valorian. Let me paint you a picture of Thresh first. Standing at 9 feet tall, with 4 arms that could crush titanium like paper, Thresh had earned his reputation the hard way. Over 300 victories, 0 defeats. His species, the Carathians, were bred for combat. Their bone density was triple that of most species. Their reflexes were lightning fast, and their pain tolerance was legendary. Thresh had been the undisputed champion of the Combat League for 7 standard years. 7 years! Do you know how many challengers had tried and failed during that time? Fighters from the warrior clans of Proxima, the cyber-enhanced gladiators of Neo-Mars, even the hulking brutes from the asteroid mining colonies. All of them ended up as decorative stains on the arena floor. The betting pools had stopped taking wagers against Thresh months ago. It wasn't even considered gambling anymore. It was just throwing credits into a black hole. The bookmakers had gotten so bored they started taking bets on how quickly Thresh would win, rather than if he would win. Then came the announcement that made the entire galaxy do a double-take. A human had registered for a championship challenge. A human! Those soft, squishy little creatures from that backwater planet called Earth. I remember laughing so hard I nearly choked on my nutrition cube. The entire press corps was in stitches. We'd heard about humans before, of course. They'd recently joined the Galactic Federation, bringing with them their bizarre customs and their tendency to pet literally anything with fur. They were considered harmless, if slightly eccentric. The human's name was Marcus Vale, and according to his registration papers, he was a former military officer from something called the United States Marine Corps. None of us had any idea what that meant, but it sounded official enough. His physical stats were, well, let's just say they were underwhelming. 5 feet 10 inches tall, 180 pounds, with the standard human configuration of 2 arms, 2 legs, and what appeared to be a disturbing lack of natural armor. "This has to be some kind of publicity stunt," muttered Zara Moonhart, my colleague from Galactic Sports Network. She was filing her claws while reviewing the challenger's information. Maybe the humans are trying to generate tourism revenue? I nodded in agreement. It made sense. What better way to get your species noticed than to have one of your people spectacularly fail in front of billions of viewers? The humans were probably counting on the sympathy factor to boost their planetary profile. The arena management was practically rubbing their hands together with glee. Ticket sales for what everyone was calling the mismatch of the millennium broke every record in the book. Beings from across the galaxy wanted to witness what was expected to be the shortest championship bout in history. 3 days before the fight, I managed to secure an interview with Marcus Vale. I expected to find a terrified creature, probably drugged up on courage enhancers or suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. Instead, I found him in the challenger's training facility, calmly doing something he called push-ups. "Mr. Vale," I began, adjusting my recording device, "are you aware that Thresh Valorian has never lost a single combat in his entire professional career?" Marcus paused mid-push-up and looked up at me with those strange, predatory eyes that humans have. "Yeah, I heard about that," he said, with a casual shrug that made my scales tingle with unease. "Sounds like he's overdue for a reality check." "Overdue for a reality check?" I blinked all 4 of my eyes in sequence, wondering if my translation device was malfunctioning. Sir, with all due respect, Thresh has defeated opponents twice your size with combat experience spanning decades. What makes you think you have any chance whatsoever? Marcus stood up and wiped sweat from his forehead with a piece of cloth. Well, Vorth. Can I call you Vorth? Here's the thing. I've read every single one of Thresh's fight records, all 312 of them. And you know what I noticed? What? I asked, genuinely curious despite myself. He's never fought a human before. I stared at him for a long moment, waiting for the punchline. That's your strategy? That he's never fought your species? Part of it, Marcus said, grabbing what appeared to be a primitive metal bar and adding circular weights to each end. The other part is that everyone expects me to lose. Because you're going to lose, I said, my voice rising to what humans would probably call a squeak. You're a tiny, soft creature going up against a living weapon. Marcus began lifting the weighted bar above his head in a smooth, controlled motion. You know, that's exactly what the Taliban thought too. The what ban? I asked. But Marcus had already moved on to another exercise. The more I watched Marcus train, the more confused I became. He wasn't using any advanced combat technology. No plasma weapons, no energy shields, no genetic enhancements. Just primitive exercises using basic equipment. He spent hours hitting a heavy bag suspended from the ceiling, practiced strange grappling movements on padded mats, and did something called sparring with holographic opponents. But there was something unsettling about the way he moved. It was precise, calculated, and utterly without wasted motion. When he hit the heavy bag, it made a sound like thunder. When he moved through his combat forms, there was a fluid grace that reminded me uncomfortably of the great predators of my home world. Tell me about your military background, I said during another interview session. Marcus was stretching, contorting his body in ways that looked painful but seemed effortless for him. 20 years in the Corps, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Somalia. Did some work with special operations later. None of those names meant anything to me, but the way he said them suggested they should. Combat experience? You could say that. He switched positions, now stretching what humans called their hamstrings. Fought insurgents, terrorists, warlords. Usually people who were better armed, better funded, and on their home turf. Marines have a saying, improvise, adapt, overcome. And you think that applies here? Marcus smiled, and for the first time, I saw something in his expression that made my predator warning instincts fire like emergency flares. Vorth, let me tell you something about humans. We're not the biggest, strongest, or fastest species in our galaxy. Hell, we're not even the smartest most of the time. But we have one thing that most other species seem to lack. Which is, we're absolutely, certifiably insane when it comes to fighting. I laughed nervously. Insane how? We're the only species I know of that looks at a bigger, stronger opponent and thinks, I bet I can figure out how to kill that thing. We've been doing it for our entire evolutionary history. Humans with sharpened sticks brought down mammoth creatures the size of small buildings. We fought wars against each other for thousands of years, constantly improving our tactics and strategies. We turned combat into both an art form and a science. But Thresh isn't human, I pointed out. Your tactics won't work on a different species. Won't they? Marcus finished his stretching and stood up. Pain is universal, Vorth. Physics works the same way everywhere. And anatomy, well, anatomy has certain commonalities across most bipedal species. The day of the fight arrived faster than I expected, probably because I was dreading it so much. The arena was packed beyond capacity. Beings had traveled from the far reaches of the galaxy to witness what everyone assumed would be Thresh's easiest victory yet. The betting odds were astronomical. One bookie was offering a 1,000,000-to-1 payout on Marcus winning, and he still couldn't find any takers. Thresh entered the arena first, as was traditional for the defending champion. The crowd erupted in cheers and roars that shook the entire structure. He was magnificent in his combat armor, each of his forearms ending in weapon-grade claws, his massive frame moving with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Then Marcus walked in. The crowd fell silent. It wasn't the respectful silence of anticipation. It was the stunned silence of beings trying to process what they were seeing. Marcus wore simple black shorts and a sleeveless shirt. No armor, no weapons, no protective gear of any kind. He looked like he was dressed for a casual workout, not a fight to the death. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted beings," announced the arena's master of ceremonies, "presenting the challenger from the planet Earth in the Sol system, weighing in at 180 pounds, Marcus Vale." The crowd's silence was broken by scattered laughter and a few confused murmurs in various alien languages. "And presenting the defending champion from Corathia Prime, weighing in at 460 pounds, with a perfect record of 312 wins and 0 losses, Thresh Valorian." The crowd exploded into cheers, chants, and what sounded like war cries from at least 6 different species. Thresh raised all 4 of his arms in acknowledgement of the crowd's adoration. Marcus simply stood there, hands at his sides, studying his opponent with the same calm intensity I'd witnessed during his training sessions. The referee, a heavily augmented Centaurian with built-in weapon scanners, approached both fighters. "Gentlemen, you know the rules. This is a combat duel to submission, incapacitation, or death. No holds barred, no weapons beyond your natural abilities. Touch gloves, and may the strongest fighter win." Thresh extended one massive hand toward Marcus. The human reached out with both of his comparatively tiny hands and briefly clasped the offered appendage. "Good luck, little creature," Thresh rumbled in his deep, gravelly voice. "I will try to make this quick." Marcus looked up at the towering champion and smiled that same unsettling smile I'd seen during our interviews. "Thanks for the advice. I'll keep that in mind." The referee stepped back and raised his arm. "Fighters ready?" Both combatants nodded. "Begin." What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about combat, physics, and the natural order of the universe. Thresh launched himself forward with the speed and force of a meteorite, all 4 arms swinging in a coordinated attack pattern that should have turned Marcus into a fine mist. It was the same opening move that had worked for 312 previous fights. Marcus wasn't there. In the split second between Thresh's charge and the moment of impact, the human had somehow moved. Not jumped, not rolled, not dived. He had simply displaced himself. One moment he was directly in front of Thresh, the next he was behind and to the left, moving with liquid smoothness. Thresh's momentum carried him past where Marcus had been standing, and the human took advantage of the opening. Moving faster than my eyes could track, Marcus struck Thresh 3 times in rapid succession. Once behind the left knee, once in the lower back, and once at the base of Thresh's thick neck. The strikes didn't look like much. Quick, precise movements that seemed almost casual. But Thresh stumbled, his perfect coordination suddenly shaky. The crowd's cheers died to confused murmurs. This wasn't how these fights were supposed to go. Thresh recovered quickly, spinning with surprising agility for such a large being. His massive fists swept through the air where Marcus should have been, but again, the human wasn't there. He was moving in a way that seemed to violate the laws of physics, flowing around Thresh's attacks like water around stone. "What is he doing?" whispered Zara beside me. "I have absolutely no idea," I admitted, leaning forward in my seat. Marcus continued his impossible dance, staying just out of reach of Thresh's increasingly frustrated attacks. Every few seconds, he would dart in, land what looked like a light tap on various parts of Thresh's anatomy, then ghost away before any retaliation could reach him. But these weren't light taps, I realized. Each strike was precisely placed and devastatingly effective. Thresh's movements were becoming more labored, his reaction time slowing. Whatever Marcus was doing, it was working. "Stand still and fight!" Thresh roared, his voice echoing through the suddenly quiet arena. Marcus paused his movement for a moment and looked up at his opponent. "Sorry, big guy, but standing still is how you get dead? Maybe if you were fighting another Carathian, but I'm not playing by your rule book." With that, Marcus did something that made the entire crowd gasp in unison. He ran straight at Thresh, not toward his legs or to one side, but directly at his center mass. Thresh, delighted by what appeared to be a suicidal frontal assault, brought all four arms together in a crushing bear hug that should have ended the fight instantly. Marcus slipped between the closing arms like smoke, grabbed hold of Thresh's combat harness, and used the champion's own momentum to swing himself up and around. In a move that defied gravity, physics, and common sense, the human ended up perched on Thresh's shoulders. Thresh thrashed and spun, trying to dislodge his unwanted passenger, but Marcus held on with what appeared to be supernatural grip strength. Then, with surgical precision, he began striking specific points on Thresh's neck and the back of his skull. "What are those techniques?" demanded someone in the press box. I activated my enhanced analysis systems, trying to identify what Marcus was doing. The strikes were hitting nerve clusters, pressure points, and what appeared to be vulnerabilities in Carathian anatomy that I didn't even know existed. How could a human, a species that had only recently joined the galactic community, know more about Carathian biology than experts who had studied it for decades? Thresh's movements became increasingly erratic. His coordination was failing, his responses slowing. Whatever Marcus was doing was systematically shutting down the champion's nervous system. With a final, desperate effort, Thresh grabbed Marcus with two of his arms and hurled him across the arena. The human flew through the air, hit the far wall with an impact that echoed like thunder and slumped to the ground in a motionless heap. The crowd erupted in cheers. This was what they had come to see. The natural order restored, the human crushed, the champion victorious. But Marcus wasn't staying down. He rolled to his feet with fluid grace, shook his head once, and smiled. Not the smile of someone who was beaten, but the smile of someone who was just getting started. "My turn," he said. That smile. By the 7 moons of my homeworld, that smile haunts me to this day. It wasn't the expression of someone who had just been launched across an arena like a projectile. It was the look of a predator who had finished analyzing his prey. Thresh staggered slightly, the effects of Marcus's nerve strikes clearly taking their toll. But he was still a mountain of muscle and fury, still the undisputed champion. He charged again, this time with more caution, keeping his guard up and his movements controlled. Marcus met him halfway. What followed was the most brutal, beautiful, and terrifying display of combat artistry I have ever witnessed. The human moved like liquid lightning, flowing around Thresh's attacks with impossible precision. Every movement had purpose, every strike found its mark, and every dodge set up the next offensive sequence. But here's what made it truly frightening. Marcus wasn't just winning. He was teaching. "Too wide on the left hook," he called out conversationally, while ducking under a swing that could have decapitated a small shuttle. "Your footwork is sloppy when you're tired." He landed 3 quick strikes to Thresh's ribs, producing audible cracks. "And you telegraph your combinations like you're sending coded messages." The crowd was no longer cheering. They were watching in stunned silence as their invincible champion was systematically dismantled by what they had assumed was easy prey. Betting terminals throughout the arena started flashing emergency warnings as the odds shifted so dramatically they broke the computational systems. "This is impossible," muttered Grix Shadowfang, the veteran commentator whose voice had narrated 1,000 victories. "Thresh should have ended this in the first 30 seconds. But Marcus wasn't done demonstrating just how wrong our assumptions had been. Thresh, growing desperate, activated his species' berserker rage. His eyes turned blood red, his muscle mass increased by 20%, and his pain receptors shut down completely. In this state, Carathians became unstoppable killing machines, capable of fighting through injuries that would fell any other being. Marcus watched this transformation with clinical interest, like a scientist observing a fascinating specimen. "Adrenaline boost, muscle enhancement, pain suppression," he said, nodding approvingly. "Nice biological upgrade. We have something similar, but we call it different names. Marines just call it getting pissed off." Thresh roared and launched into a berserker assault, his 4 arms moving in patterns too fast for most beings to follow. The very air seemed to vibrate from the speed and force of his strikes. Marcus slipped into what I can only describe as a different gear entirely. Where before he had been quick, now he became supernatural. Where before he had been precise, now he became surgical. He moved through Thresh's berserker assault like he was dancing, each step choreographed to perfection, each movement conserving energy while maximizing damage. "You know what your problem is, Thresh," Marcus said, his breathing still completely controlled despite the incredible pace of combat. "You've been winning so long, you forgot what it feels like to fight someone who's actually trying to kill you." That's when I realized what I was witnessing. This wasn't a sporting contest for Marcus. This wasn't entertainment or competition. This was war, condensed into personal combat, and he was treating it with the deadly seriousness of someone who had spent decades learning how to end lives efficiently. Marcus grabbed Thresh's lead arm, twisted in a way that made several beings in the crowd wince, and used the leverage to drive his knee into the champion's solar plexus. The impact sounded like a small explosion. Thresh doubled over, his berserker rage flickering as his body tried to process the damage. Marcus didn't give him time to recover. Moving with mechanical precision, he struck nerve clusters along Thresh's spine, each blow causing visible spasms in different muscle groups. "Spinal tap at C7, L3, and T12, Marcus announced like he was giving a medical lecture. "Should shut down your motor functions in about 15 seconds. "How do you know Carathian anatomy?" Thresh gasped, his voice strained. "I studied," Marcus replied simply. "Spent the last 6 months learning everything I could about your species, your fighting style, your strengths and weaknesses. Did you know you have a secondary heart that only activates during extreme stress? It's located right here." Marcus's fist shot out with piston-like force, striking a point just below Thresh's left armpit. The champion's eyes went wide, and he staggered backward, clutching his chest. "Secondary cardiac disruption," Marcus continued in that same conversational tone. "Not fatal, but it'll make you dizzy as hell for the next few minutes." The arena was silent except for Thresh's labored breathing and the quiet hum of recording equipment. Billions of beings across the galaxy were watching their understanding of combat effectiveness get completely rewritten. Thresh tried one final desperate gambit. Pulling a concealed blade from his boot, he lunged at Marcus with the last of his strength. The weapon never reached its target. Marcus caught Thresh's wrist, twisted it in a direction that made my own joints ache in sympathy, and relieved him of the blade with casual efficiency. Then, with movements too fast to track, he struck 17 different pressure points. In rapid succession, Thresh collapsed, not unconscious, not injured beyond recovery, but completely paralyzed. He lay on the arena floor, his eyes still alert and aware, but unable to move any part of his body below the neck. "Temporary paralysis," Marcus explained to the stunned crowd. "He'll be back to normal in about 6 hours. No permanent damage, just a little nap time." Marcus walked over to where Thresh lay and knelt down beside the defeated champion. "You're a hell of a fighter," he said quietly, his words picked up by the arena's sensitive microphones. "In a fair fight, you probably would have killed me. But here's the thing about humans, Thresh. We don't believe in fair fights. We believe in winning." He stood up and looked around the arena, his gaze sweeping across thousands of shocked alien faces. "Anyone else want to give it a try?" he asked. The silence stretched on for nearly a full minute. Then, slowly, scattered applause began. Not the roar of bloodthirsty spectators, but the respectful acknowledgement of beings who had witnessed something extraordinary. As the medical team rushed in to attend to Thresh, I found myself struggling to process what I had just seen. Everything I thought I knew about combat, about species hierarchy, about the natural order of things, had been turned upside down in the span of 23 minutes. I caught up with Marcus as he was leaving the arena, still wearing the same simple workout clothes, not even breathing hard. "How?" I asked, my usual eloquence completely deserting me. Marcus paused and considered the question seriously. "Vorth, you want to know the real difference between humans and most other species I've met?" I nodded eagerly. Most species evolve in environments where they become specialized. Bigger, stronger, faster, more armored, better adapted to specific conditions. Humans evolved differently. We became generalists. We learned to adapt, to improvise, to overcome whatever challenges we faced with whatever tools we had available. He gestured toward the arena where Thresh was being loaded onto a medical transport. Thresh is an incredible fighter, probably one of the best natural warriors I've ever faced. But he's a specialist. He knows one way to fight, one style, one approach. When that didn't work, he had no backup plan. And you? I had 17 backup plans. And if those failed, I would have improvised 18 more. Marcus started walking toward the exit, then paused and looked back at me. "You know what the scariest part is, Vorth?" "What?" "I'm not even considered a particularly good fighter by human military standards. I'm just a regular Marine. Back on Earth, there are operators who make me look like a clumsy amateur." With that terrifying thought, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing there with my recording equipment and a story that would change everything. The aftermath of the fight sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Within hours, recruitment offices for human military forces were flooded with applications from warrior species across known space. The Galactic Combat League announced new weight and species classification systems. 3 different governments officially requested military training exchanges with Earth. But perhaps most significantly, the betting industry implemented new regulations specifically designed to account for what became known as human factor variables in combat predictions. Thresh Valorian recovered fully, as Marcus had promised. To his credit, he took the defeat with dignity and even requested a private meeting with Marcus to discuss training techniques. The two became unlikely friends, with Thresh eventually traveling to Earth to study human martial arts. As for Marcus Vale, he declined the championship title, stating that he had only entered the competition to see what all the fuss was about. He returned to Earth, where he reportedly became a combat instructor for something called Force Recon Marines. But that's another story entirely. I've covered thousands of fights since then, but none have matched the impact of that single bout. It was the day the galaxy learned a fundamental truth that humans had known for millennia. It's not the size of the fighter that matters, it's the size of the fight in the fighter. And humans, as it turns out, have more fight in them than any species has a right to possess. The arena still stands, and there's a small plaque near the entrance that reads, "In memory of our assumptions about who the real predators are." Below that, in smaller text, it says, "Never underestimate a species that turned warfare into an art form." Every time I pass that plaque, I remember Marcus Vale's smile, and I shudder just a little bit. Because somewhere out there in the galaxy, there are millions more humans just like him, and that thought keeps me awake at night.